Support for Headline Humboldt is made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, North Coast Congressman Jared Huffman joins us to talk about the recent near-government shutdown, the upcoming Congress, and how Democrats are preparing for another tumultuous Trump term. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. After 4 years of relative quiet in the national political scene, the world is bracing now for the return of chaos agent and President-elect Donald Trump. I have a hard time believing people forgot just how wild and unsettling Trump's first term was. So I've come to think it's actually the chaos that many of his voters want. They're choosing to shake up the machine and see what happens. They seem to have become so jaded by the political process that they want to see it destroyed. And Trump is one way of lighting that fuse. Congressman Jared Huffman sat down with us this week to discuss the upcoming political year and how Trump's chaos has already led to dysfunction. This past week, the government almost came to a screeching halt for no apparent political reason other than billionaires banging on about bad spending. Irony, if nothing else, will survive.
It is chaos. And we all lived through the first Trump presidency when his ability to just throw everyone into chaos with a tweet was a feature, really, of his first 4 years. And now we have a second billionaire who actually owns that platform and has made it, even more, I don't know, I would say contemptible. And so chaos is going to be a defining feature of the next few years, and it's going to come from more than just Trump. He's surrounded himself with other chaos agents and artists, and it's going to be very unsettling. So, my view, James, is we're going to have to pick our battles. We can't get through the next few years in a constant state of alarm and hyperventilation. We're going to have to be really smart and disciplined, but obviously we're going to have to push back on a lot of this.
Yeah. So and now in terms of this has been put off for a couple of months, right? And then it will come back to the Congress for more consideration and debate, or what do you think that's going to look like?
So yeah, in terms of the immediate result, we have government funding for the next 3 months, and we have no debt limit increase. And we have a few other things that we were able to achieve in there. So, some of it very good. But it definitely was I think it portends the kind of disruption and chaos and difficulty negotiating and just governing that we're going to see under a second Trump presidency.
It seemed almost that there was some ideological confusion there like trying to eradicate the debt limit after all the noise that's been made about it for all these years seems like sort of contrary to the right's traditional position. Am I wrong in that?
Well, no, you're not wrong, but I think everybody should be able to see exactly what they're doing. They're not very subtle about it. This is not a sudden embrace of borrowing and spending and everything like that. They know that the debt limit is an obstacle to their intent in the first 100 days to do a massive tax cut for billionaires, and they want to get rid of it. So what better way than to permanently get rid of it, let Trump explode the debt during his 4 years. A lot of conservative folks want to see that because they think that it will sort of by default force major reforms to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which is, their long-standing holy grail.
There's been I think, a discernible strategy over the past 8 years or so of, trying to push the government into inefficiency and disruption, and then point to government as dysfunctional. Obviously, there's a tight majority. It's not very big, and it may be shrinking. There's a Texas congresswoman now who was found to be in a home, and other people are going to be leaving, and so it's going to be very slim. How does that affect the GOP's ability to govern, and does that work toward the Democrats' advantage, or is that just going to be a source of continuing chaos?
Yes to both of those things, I think. Okay. Democrats will be relevant. We are not powerless. For the first few months of the next Congress, functionally, they're going to be unable to lose more than 2 votes. in the House. And you just saw, I mean, they lost 38 votes on this government funding deal that they worked out. So I think Democrats are going to have plenty of opportunities to leverage our minority status and force them to work with us. And that's something they're not very good at. They like to pretend that Democrats don't matter, that they can just roll over us. They like to pretend they have a mandate, which they clearly do not. They've got a razor thin majority and a dysfunctional one at that.
Mortem on the whole election. Why do you think the GOP won the trifecta? I mean, it's tight. It wasn't like like you said, they don't have a mandate, but they did
Yeah.
win. And from my perspective, sitting back and watching the thing unfold, I couldn't believe it happened. After all the last, years that we've been through and everything we've seen and all of the, legal proceedings and convictions and accusations, corruption, it was shocking to me that they managed to pull it off. What do you think is behind that?
Well, look, I don't pretend to have perfect insight into those questions, but I do think President Biden was deeply unpopular, and I think that is probably the biggest explanation for all of this. He shouldn't have run for re-election, and I've been pretty candid in saying that. I think some Democrats want to sugarcoat that. There's a lot of affection for Joe Biden. I think he's a wonderful man, but he was definitely guarded and kind of propped up a little bit by his handlers and his inner circle in ways that is not good for anyone. Um, and that was exposed in that terrible debate performance in June. We should never have gotten to that point because once that was out in the light of day, it was essentially too late to do anything about it. We already had several years of a baked in narrative that Democrats didn't take inflation seriously, that Democrats were sort of to blame for all of the I guess the concerns about Joe Biden's capacity, things like that. And Kamala Harris, had 100 and a few days to try to distinguish herself and put it all back together. She couldn't do it. There was probably no way for her to win. And I think the drag of all of that really hurt Democrats up and down the ticket.
You think that I mean, what is fairness in politics, right? But do you think that's fair given the record of the past 4 years?
Well, no, I think it was a very productive record, but when you are struggling to buy groceries and to pay for your housing, and the cost of living, everything from healthcare to energy and everything else is just crushing you. You're angry and you want change. You want disruptive change. And I think that's a big part of what this election was all about. It was very hard for Democrats with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket to be the party of major change.
There's a long list of threats that seem to be emerging now that the Trump administration is preparing to take office. One of the most obvious is Kash Patel becoming head of the FBI. There's been threats made against various members of Congress and the Senate about, the sort of enemies list and that sort of thing. I wonder if you guys have discussed in a way that you're willing to share any kind of strategy that you might have to sort of fight that off if that becomes a reality.
It's a pretty grim subject, and it's real. They haven't just talked about things like retribution um, for fun or to score political points. They really want to go after Democrats and punish them. And they want to go after, Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger too. So I think there's almost a certainty that they will try to do that. And I do think that when it comes to actual, they're not going to be able to just lock them up. They're not going to be able to even necessarily prosecute anyone because there were no crimes committed. People just opposed Donald Trump and his agenda. But what they can do is make their lives hell through endless investigations. They can force them to incur huge costs for legal fees, for their own personal security because of all of these violent thugs that they will activate to, make their lives miserable and threaten them or even harm them. So all of that is, really sobering and it's real. And do we have a do we have a strategy or plan for that? Not a good one. What can you do when your own government decides to drag you through all of this misery and all of these threats? You find folks who are willing to help you pay for lawyers and security teams, and you do your best.
I mean, Kash Patel as head of the FBI makes me nauseous just saying it. And Hegseth as defense secretary. I mean, these people are obviously unqualified, but even worse, they seem morally bankrupt in some ways. And how bad is this going to get, do you think? I mean, do you feel like the first 4 years, the limits of government sort of held in a lot of ways, and we were able to get through it. But he's coming in more educated now on how the systems work and where the barriers are. And I think he has more true believers around him and is not, there's not as many GOP functionaries around him to put limits on him. So how bad could this get? I mean, I know people
A lot
are
worse.
wondering that.
I can't sugarcoat this. I know people would love to hear some comforting assessment of all of this, that it won't be that bad. It's going to be a lot worse than it was the first time around, for the reason that you just said. There are no longer any adults in the room, any institutionalists in the room. There are, crazy white supremacists and unhinged TV personalities like Pete Hegseth, and extreme nihilist ideologues like Kash Patel. Yeah, but you would have to be, wishful and naive to think that it's not going to be far worse than it was during the first Trump presidency. And there are fewer guardrails. We have absolute immunity from the Supreme Court. We have a supermajority on the Supreme Court that Trump created. And we have the trifecta, which is not just a trifecta of Republican governance. The Republicans doing that governing have changed. It is a lot more MAGA loyalists. They have been beaten into submission a lot more than they were during the first Trump presidency. So, just by any measure, we're in for a very, very bumpy ride.
One of the things that was recently mentioned in the news was that Biden caught up with Trump in terms of judicial appointments.
Yeah.
California has been vocal about its strategy with some of this stuff, is to challenge a lot of things that are coming out of Washington and hopefully fight off what it can, and that the Supreme Court won't be able to hear every issue, and so that may prevent some bad things from happening. Does the success of Biden's appointments put us in a better position in terms of the judiciary and fighting off a lot of this stuff? And can we expect the judiciary to be an effective tool in curbing some of the worst excesses?
Well, it'll help, because those district judges and the circuit court judges will at least issue rulings that can slow down some of the worst measures. But eventually it lands at the Supreme Court, and I don't put anything past this deeply compromised and ideological Supreme Court. So, no one should think that the judicial branch is going to absolutely save us. It may slow things down, and that may be super helpful as we try to weather the storm ahead.
Am I wrong in thinking that the next 2 years is like the pivotal crunch point? Because if you can get to the next midterm election, there's a chance, probably a good chance, that the public will react against what they're seeing from the Trump administration,
Yeah.
and give the Democrats some leverage in one or either of the houses.
Well, it definitely will give us a chance to put a check back in place with a Democratic House, maybe a Democratic Senate. But if you look at Project 2025 and all of the stuff that they're going to try to do, it is absolutely aimed at marginalizing even the power of Congress to do its Article 1 responsibilities and serve as a check on executive power. They are all in on this unitary executive theory and extreme theories like impoundment, where they will simply ignore the budget legislation that Congress passes and refuse to spend money in states like California unless California bends the knee on immigration policy and any number of other things. So, look, we got to do this. We got to win back the House. California needs to assert its states' rights and maximize its effectiveness as a check and balance. But there's no guarantee that any of it absolutely works.
It's interesting to me that we have these two conflicting sort of meta narratives in the country right now. Trump and his people got elected, and now the cabinet is staffed with billionaires. I mean, it's like he's making a point by appointing people who were successful in business and have amassed great wealth. At the same time, you have Luigi Mangione, who goes and assassinates a CEO. And oddly, he's celebrated by a lot of folks for doing that. And that's obviously foul, but there's this bifurcation kind of in what the country is seeing and doing. What do you think that says about our country and about wealth and politics of the moment? I mean, it seems like people are angry and they're voting against the establishment, but at the same time, they're kind of empowering the very people that they're angry at. And how do we get out of that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's a dilemma. It's an interesting way that you frame it, and I guess I should start by saying that, I have no empathy whatsoever for this
Yeah,
Mangione murderer.
yeah.
I'm not going to be one of those that tries to rationalize that, or suggest that there was somehow an excuse that we should appreciate behind this heinous crime. We got to stop doing that, and anyone who does that, shame on them. The guy should just be locked up and face the consequences for committing murder. But yeah, we are in a new Gilded Age that's kind of even more weird and extreme than the first one over a century ago. To be able to put these folks in charge of government, to make them into these celebrities, if not superheroes. This is just grotesque. It's like a caricature of inequality. And for some reason, maybe just the entertainment value of it, they've got a significant percentage of the American voting public that's sort of good with it. I don't get it. And I think they will soon, come to see that this was a bad idea. This is not in their interest. These people do not have their well-being at heart. Elon Musk being, the greatest example of that. He is out for himself and to further enrich himself at all costs. And they're going to be victims of that, not beneficiaries.
Part of what worries me, and this is a little bit off topic, but as technology develops and things like AI come more to the forefront, our society may be going through some real changes. And to have people in power who come from that kind of position makes me afraid for the future in a lot of ways. And so hopefully we can get more representative in our democracy coming up.
Yeah. So AI becomes more and more dominant, and the folks behind AI are these billionaire superheroes that Donald Trump
Exactly
is
right.
surrounding
Yeah.
himself with. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just seems dystopian, and it's fast approaching. The Restore Act. You seemed like you were facing a sticky dilemma, not just you, but I mean, with the tribes and their positioning on the wind farm off the coast here. And this seems like an effort to kind of ameliorate the situation. Am I correct in reading it that way? And how do you think that this helps help them be a part of the process and feel respected and get their priorities addressed?
Yeah, and no, I think you're more or less correct. I am trying to, at least partially, to address the concerns we've heard from some of our tribes on the North Coast about the offshore wind proposal. They have just been afterthoughts on major infrastructure and major extractive industries in the past. And we don't want that to happen here. Now, when I look at offshore wind, and I am very bullish on offshore wind. I don't see anything fundamentally incompatible with equity and social justice and economic opportunity and inclusion and all the other values that we want to see for tribes and for other disadvantaged communities. But right now, we have a system where all of the royalties from offshore wind just go right back to the U.S. Treasury. There's nothing in it for local communities. There's a pretty good chunk in the auction revenues, which is a one-time deal when these companies bid and purchase their leasing rights. They have to put some money aside for community benefit agreements. Some of that will go to tribes, and that's a good thing. But in terms of a long-term revenue stream, there's nothing. And this legislation changes that, and for the first time, would put tribes explicitly into the mix. Now, even for things like oil and gas royalties, where there is a set aside that goes into the Land and Water Conservation Fund that goes to states and local communities. Tribes have never been part of that either for fossil fuel energy projects. So I think this is new and historic and important. It's the right way to do this, but it's not the only thing that needs to be addressed when it comes to tribes. They also need to have a type of consultation, government to government consultation, that is more than just a ministerial check the box act. They need to be brought in at the front end of these projects. Ideally, they should be included in the projects. I mean, we have tribes that can do construction work. We have tribes that are, economically developing and diversifying. They should be looked at as potential partners in projects like this. And so I am trying to change, many of these things. And they're going to continue to be tribal concerns that we're going to want to hear and address about the particulars of offshore wind, the siting and the cables and all sorts of other things in terms of the physical elements of it. So I don't want to diminish the need to address all of that too. But in terms of just the buy-in and the consultation and the economic upside, that all needs to change, and this legislation tries to do that.
Yeah. You were recently selected as the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I wonder, I mean, we've been watching things like the Wind Power Project and other things. It seems like progress getting made on a bunch of fronts. And now there's this fear that a lot of that progress will be arrested and things may go backward. Are we at any risk right now of the wind power in any way being sidetracked, because Trump famously has issues with wind power, and I don't know if there's anything he can pull to stop progress on that front, and on a lot of other issues that the same concern. What are you most worried about in terms of his impact?
Well, yeah, there's reason for concern. I mean, Trump has said some pretty absolute things about stopping offshore wind development. But he says a lot of absolute things, across the board, in ways that he doesn't always mean, doesn't always follow through. So I think we're going to have to see. I know that he has chosen someone as Secretary of Interior that could have been a lot worse. I mean, Doug Burgum was a governor who actually set some clean energy goals and some climate goals for his state. I don't think he's a climate denier. He has a business background. And so I think there's some opportunities to engage with him and make the case for why offshore wind is a really good thing for California and other states. And I'm looking forward to at least, trying my best. But is there a risk that the federal side of this really exciting and historic project could soften, if not go away? Yeah, I mean, I'm very concerned about that, and I'm going to be doing everything I can to try to address it.
You got elected, like I said, as the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee. There was recently a battle over the House Oversight Committee for leadership, and it seemed to represent a generational thing. Is that a correct or accurate read of the situation? And do you think that the old guard has done enough to kind of let new, fresh blood in to leadership?
Yeah, I think it's a little more complicated than that. I do understand why the media was kind of drawn to that narrative, the young versus old, especially when you have, someone as young and, compelling as AOC and, running against a 76-year-old. So each of these races kind of stands on its own. There's sort of unique reasons why they all settled out a little bit differently. I was running against an older member, and I'm not a spring chicken here, James. I'm 60 years old, even though I know I look 38.
When you come off young, I mean, you do. So you're fit.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But when Raul Grijalva withdrew from the race because I was on track to win, all of a sudden I found myself the old guy in a contest against a 45-year-old. And so, all of these age dynamics, were intriguing to the media, but I don't think they were the defining reasons for how these races shook out. I brought what I thought were some pretty compelling merits to my race, and that carried me through against two different opponents. And so did Jerry Connolly, the old 76-year-old in the oversight race. He's a serious guy. and very well respected and very good at what he does. I think AOC represented herself very well, and I think the smartest thing that she did was after she lost, she signaled that she is going to keep working within the institution. She's not going to just take her ball and go home and start attacking Democrats again. She's going to try to continue being a team player, and people notice that. And so, to me, the big takeaway in that race was maybe the continued evolution and maturation of AOC. She's going to be a serious player
Oh,
in
yeah.
national politics over time.
Interesting. And I think, thank you for sort of explaining that, because I think that was sort of the narrative that's caught, fire a little bit in the public. We have about a minute left, but one thing I wanted to pose to you that I've noticed a lot from is that people who were activated the first time in 2016, and we had the Women's March right after the election, and there was just a lot of kind of energy to resist. People are exhausted.
Yep.
And a lot of people are just tuning away. They don't want to, they just figure they'll tune back in 2 years, and when the next election comes up and they can change something, and until then, they're not going to pay attention. What are your thoughts on that, and why is it important, do you think, for people to stay engaged, even though they may not be seeing the kind of government that they want right now?
It's a super important question. Thanks for ending with that. So, look, the way fascists and tyrants win is by exhausting and overwhelming and intimidating people into just checking out and going along with what they do. So we cannot afford for that to happen. But I feel like, as one of the leaders of, what you might think of as the resistance, the loyal opposition in Congress, I can't keep people in a constant state of agitation and alarm. It just doesn't work for a long period of time. It kind of worked in 2017. We were able to, build this incredible fulcrum of energy that immediately led to a blue wave election in 2018 and put a check back on Donald Trump. And I think we all thought that all of that energy would do the trick, and it worked that time. We've got a longer haul ahead of us now. These guys have unified government. Trump is going to be president for 4 years with absolute immunity. So I've got to be a little more selective in the way I activate, people's emotions to the extent that I have the ability to do so. I'm not going to be a constant alarmist, lighting my hair on fire, what's left of it, every time, Donald Trump or Elon Musk, tweet something outrageous. We've got to pick our battles. This will be a more sustained effort to save our democracy and the rule of law and our individual rights and our environment. And that's just, it's a different fight. We've got to be a little calmer, I think, about this, and a little more disciplined, and that's what I'm going to try to do.
That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Next time I see you here, it'll be 2025. Stay tuned, stay informed.